Hi guys. I've been trying to think through what subjects would be most immediately helpful. So I've been trying to do these kind of in the order of things that I think would help reassure people the most, and then go from there into some of the more fun or more practical day-to-day stuff. So in this video, I want to talk about what to do if you don't know the subject matter that you're trying to teach your kids. So if you're considering homeschooling and you have a high schooler who's in math, that you never even took, or maybe you don't know how to teach reading. I mean, that's a really daunting thing. If you've never um, been taught how to teach a child to read, how are you even going to do that? So if your kid's 4 and you're thinking, if I keep them home, what's going to happen to them? So I'm going to talk about that in this video. To begin with, this is going to get a little bit more into the specifics of my homeschool philosophy, my educational philosophy. Um, oh, but it's okay if you do not have an educational philosophy. That makes it sound like that's this thing. You don't need one, and here's why. Two reasons. One, it's just a lot of words that means what you think about how kids learn. So you've already got that. You already know what you think about how kids learn. Two, I have an educational philosophy, and I have spent a lot of time crafting my educational philosophy because that's fun for me. Again, you don't have to do it. Don't. Do what's fun for you. Whatever you like to do, you do that. And you can have my educational philosophy. And then you don't have to worry about it. And if yours doesn't match mine, that's totally fine. Just don't panic that you don't have one. You don't need one. However, my educational philosophy is going to come out a little bit more in this video. So again, take what works. If it doesn't fit, that's fine. Okay, so when I was growing up and when I first got married before I had kids, I was adamant that I would never homeschool. I am not a teacher. I will never be a teacher. I come from a long line of teachers. My mom was a teacher. My grandmother, I think a couple grandparents were teachers. Great grandparents, all teachers. My dad was a teacher. I have absolute respect for teachers. And what I do, I love, but I'm not a classroom teacher. I can't see myself ever being able to do that. And it wasn't until my son was 3, and I vividly remember looking at him and realizing, oh, I'm going to homeschool him. And I had no idea up until that point. It just hit me out of nowhere that I was going to be homeschooling, because I had been adamantly opposed to it up until that point. One of the things that hit me all in this, I mean, it was like a ton of bricks. So one of the bricks was, in order to homeschool, I didn't need to teach him like a classroom teacher. And so since that time, I have been again kind of growing into this thing. In the very beginning, it was really scary. I was really scared. I would watch the school bus go past and think, okay, if I'm keeping him home, he's 4. If I'm not sending him to school, what am I doing to justify? What do I have, to offer what I'm not doing? How can I offer something good enough to justify not sending him to school? And it was hard. I didn't know if I'd made the right decision. I didn't know if I was going to be able to teach him. Okay, so what if you don't know the subject matter? What if you don't know how to teach your kid to read? Obviously, there are resources. Curriculums are going to have, parents' guides. But even within that, it's hard. So you read the parents' guide and you're like, okay, do I read this lesson to them? Do I make them read it? Like, what do I literally do? And I'm actually going to do another video about that. Like, really physically, how do you teach a kid something? But this video is more about what to do if you don't know, so you can't teach them. The first answer is you're going to learn with them. And it sounds scary, but it's not. So a lot of the math, I'm not a math person. And I'm not going to lie, if we get into hard math, my husband helps. I am not a math person. Um, and honestly, for math, my best advice is find a math person. But you're also going to be learning along with your kids. Okay, so you're not going to suddenly be asked to teach something that you have no resources. You have the internet. If you don't have the internet, library, ask a friend, ask your kid, hey, did you learn this last year? Does this, why don't you teach me? Um, and you kind of work through it with them. You don't have to know everything because you have the same resources that they have. You're learning it along with them. I have learned so much, history especially. I did not know. There's so much I didn't know, and I've been loving it, because I'm just reading it along with the kids. It's not any like major. And if so, so here's the most important thing. Let's just cut to the chase. I'm doing a lot of talking. If you don't know, so history, right? You're reading. Your kid says, who's the first Tsar of Russia? Here's what you say. Great question. How are you going to find out? So, two things. One, it's not your job. It is not your job. Even public school teachers, I believe, public school teachers, feel free to correct me, but I don't think that they know everything about everything. It's not your job to know everything about everything. Even if you are trained in this, you're not going to know everything about everything. So, in my personal experience and opinion, I'm not looking to hand my children all of the facts that I know in order that they should memorize them. What I'm really trying to teach my kids is how to learn. So when we get to something that they don't know, when we get to something that I don't know, um, instead of worrying about it and trying to figure it out, I say to them, hey, how are we going to find this out? What are we going to do? And then we do it. We're going to look online. Okay, cool, let's do that. We're going to call grandma. Awesome, let's do that. We have written emails to people that work at museums, okay, how are you going to find out? Especially if you have older kids, they can do this themselves. You don't necessarily need to sit and hold their hand and say, okay, did you Google this? I mean, they've been on the internet since whenever, they can Google. And I get that it probably feels like a cop out, but it's not. It is literally teaching kids how to learn. And you can teach them all the facts in the world, but if they don't know how to learn and how to be interested in things and how to find out what they need to know, once they leave and graduate, they can't progress at all. If they want a different kind of job, if they want to whatever, this is an actual life skill that you're teaching. Not only does it teach them how to learn, it teaches them to really enjoy learning because it puts it in their hands. It puts things that they're interested in. And this is actually a whole entire homeschooling curriculum. And we'll get into that a different time. But you can literally homeschool using only this if you want. Most people throw in math. But this is unschooling right here. You could literally do an entire curriculum based on this. And again, I would still throw in some math. But the kind of stuff that you wind up covering, they remember because they've looked it up, they found it out. It's not just memorizing things. And it's really cool because things start to kind of, the more that you learn, the more that you want to know, and the more it connects to something else that you've learned, and you kind of build this web. Feels like a web in my brain. This web of information where it's easier to stick new stuff in because, oh, that makes sense because the first Tsar of Russia became Tsar in blah, 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 blah. I'm making this up, by the way. I don't know Russian history. I really should. I feel bad that I don't know it. It's on my list of things for when I have free time. Anyway, so, that makes sense because this Tsar did this and this date, but then I remember that before that, the Mongols did something. Again, I'm literally making this up. I don't know. But it's easier to remember stuff because you've kind of already put this web of information together that you have gathered because you care, you being the kid. Or the family. A lot of times this is family stuff. So at one point, my entire family was really interested in space. And so one kid would look something up, and then that would spark a different kid. And so we were watching YouTube videos about, comets, and that would spark a different kid to be like, oh, that was at a time when they were landing a lander on a comet. So then it was, oh, okay, so out of Legos, I made this lander, and a different kid is doing that. And then another kid sees that and was like, I want to make a video, and it all feeds off of each other. So you can do this as you literally can tell any child old enough to read, go find out and tell me what you find out. With younger kids, you can still, you're going to have to help a little bit more, but they can sticky note book pages, that they want to read. They can think up ideas of how they're going to find things out. And guys, you don't have to, like, if they want to do something that's going to cost $1 million, then again, talk to them, give them the parameters. Okay, well, that's going to cost a lot of money. How are we going to get that money? And see what they say. Maybe they come up with a way to get you $1 million, in which case, fantastic. Most likely, they're going to work through that, learn to problem solve, another thing that you're really going to want them to learn, and come up with a different idea. So even young kids can do this, but older kids, you don't necessarily even have to be involved. Just say, come back and tell me when you find out. At different points, my kids have had notebooks, put it down in your notebook. Most of the time, my kids have notebooks. So, okay, write it down, write the question down, write the answer down. Don't write the answer down because you hate writing, draw a picture of it. Come back and verbally tell me. Make a YouTube channel about all the things that you're learning during quarantine. And, I'm not sure any kids would actually take you up on that, but Who knows? Throw it out there. It might stick. Um, so finding information, learning how to find information, sharing the information that they find in a way that is useful, that somebody else can be like, oh, okay, that makes sense. That's all stuff that is hugely, hugely important for them to learn. So, on the one hand, this feels like a cop out. But on the other hand, what you're actually doing is educating your children. Um, because, again, that's what they need to learn. They need to learn the facts. I am not a person that believes that children just don't need to learn anything. I'm all about learning everything. But that's kind of part of it. Everything means everything, and it all connects together. I'm going to just start ranting. I'm going to need to do another video about how we do, project work and all of this stuff. But the connections that get made between one thing that you've learned and something that seemed totally unrelated is very cool. And it keeps that knowledge there because it actually connects to something and it means something and it's used for something. So, if you don't know the answers, all you have to do is say, that's a great question. How are we going to find out? Okay, that you can do this for their curriculum stuff, They're reading through their science, they're like, Mom, what does that mean? That's a great question. How are we going to find out? They're going to hate this, but they'll, you know. Okay, so I was kind of kidding about that because kids always hate whatever expression you use all the time. This is going to be hard for kids coming out of public school. This is potentially going to be hard because it's so open-ended, and public school doesn't always have that open-endedness. I know that a lot of classes work really hard to put that in there, and that's great, but at the end of the day, you still have, a deadline and a whatever, and this doesn't have that. I mean, if you get stuck all day long researching the Titanic, and the next day you're still researching the Titanic, I'm going to let you research the Titanic, So this might be stressful for kids who are used to having an assignment and saying you have to get this done at this time. So we don't do grades. Yeah, that's a whole nother thing. So if you don't know this stuff, you have time, just like in everything else, because your kid has time to go do this research. Because if you want to, I suppose you can grade their papers. But I'm not grading my kids' work because I don't expect them to get a B. There is no B. Because if they don't know, they're going to learn it. If it's spelling, we will keep practicing until you learn it. If we need to, we'll, get creative. There's whatever. That's a whole other thing. We can do all kinds of creative things with spelling. If you don't know how to do this math, we're going to do it until you can do it. So there's no option to get a B or a C or D. There's no grades at all. It's just not a thing. So if you're filling out this worksheet and you don't know the answer and I don't know the answer, so again, if you know the answer, it's okay to tell your kids the answer sometimes. You don't need to just be this monk who's always like, the universe will provide you with an answer. If you can help them out, if you can explain it really quick, feel free. This is for when you don't know. It's also fine if you don't know. Again, call your husband if he might know. You don't have to do this with every single question, but you can. And so if you have a worksheet and it's chemistry, and what element does this thing, and you don't know, and your kid doesn't know, and they say, what element? You say, I don't know. How are we going to find out? And it doesn't matter because they don't have to turn that paper in tomorrow for a grade because there's no grade. They do still need to eventually do the paper, but they can start looking up things now. They can move on to spelling and say, okay, hey, cool. When your spelling is done, why don't you go ahead and look that up? Because you have time. If what they're doing turns out to be way cooler than what you had planned for the day, awesome, fantastic. If they're learning all about comets and landers, excellent. If it's just a 2-second Google and then they write it down, still fine. Everything doesn't have to be this deep, intricate web of learning. Because it all actually is. It all goes into that same web. But every interaction doesn't have to be this huge, deep, discovering the universe. They can discover Google. Google it. Don't tell them to Google it. Ask how they want to find out. If they want to Google it, then they can Google it, write it down, move on. Worksheet's done. Worksheet's correct. No worries. Yeah, so the bottom line is you don't have to know all of this stuff to teach your kid. What you do have to know is how to help them find things out, and how to help yourself find things out. And some of that's just trial and error. It honestly is. there are some things that I would have thought would have been helpful that turned out to not be helpful. And then some things that I never ever would have thought of that the kids were like, let's try this. And we did. And it worked. It was really cool. Um, and again, this video is getting long. I can give examples of all that stuff if anybody's interested. But the bottom line is you do not have to know everything that your child is supposed to learn. Because one, you're going to be learning along with them. It's not your job to just regurgitate information for them to memorize. They're going to be learning, you're going to be learning. It is so much more important for you to teach them how to learn and to model that yourself. If they see you never asking questions, never trying to figure anything out, never looking anything up, then they're not going to think that's a thing people do. But if they see you, oh, I don't really know how to explain that. I'll tell my kids all the time, hey, I think I know the answer to this, but I want to look it up really quick just to be sure I'm giving you the right information and that I'm not remembering it correctly. And then I Google it, and they see me doing that. And then they know that that's a normal thing. If you want information, you go find it. You don't have to be an expert. Your kids don't have to become experts. Again, we're just all trying to get through this year. We're just trying to get through the year. So if you get through the year with your kids learning a little bit more about how to Google, awesome. I'm assuming most of your kids already know how to Google, to be honest. But again, don't make this harder on yourself than it needs to be. Kids from a very young age can work towards learning stuff themselves. They're going to need your help, especially if they're not reading yet or if they don't have access, to internet or whatever. But it's not your job to already have all the information. Math is the biggest thing. You can find resources for that. Khan Academy is one. YouTube videos everywhere about how to do different kinds of math. Get somebody who loves math to explain it, because people that love math can explain it really well. But there are resources out there. You don't necessarily have to know everything. Teaching reading. I'm gonna have to do a whole other thing about teaching reading. Again, that's one of my biggest, hugest. That's a scary one, and you can't go tell a kid, that's a great question. Come back. What does this letter say? That's a great question. You can't do that. So there are a couple places where this doesn't work as well. It can work with math. Reading, you can't tell a kid to go look up what a letter says. So I'll do a different thing about reading, I think. But for the most part, if you don't know, that's fine. Find out together. Have your kid find out separately. Have them tell you. It's going to be okay.